What time is it, my creatives? That's right, it's photo hacking time, and today we're going to be bringing you another Artrage tutorial. Now, this is a series in the brush designer series on Artrage. So before we get into creating custom brushes, first we need to understand how the brush designer actually works. Now, what I wanted to do is I wanted to basically go over Artrage and all of the aspects of the brush designer so you can understand how to create your own brushes without guessing what to do. And so what I've seen on most YouTube videos is that people are guessing how this works, and I'm basically going to break it down in the easiest terms possible. So let's go ahead with step one. Okay, so I've already created a new document here. So you're going to go to File, New Painting, and then you can choose the canvas settings here. I have chose the watercolor paper. And you can put in your pixel dimensions. I've put in 3,600 by 3,600 pixels, which literally translates to 12 by 12 inches. And then you press OK. Now, this is the new update of Artrage. So if you haven't downloaded the latest update, I believe this is the 0.7 version. Let me check on that. Okay, so your new version is 6.8. No new versions found. So I believe the previous version was 6.6, and then they did 6.7, and now this is 6.8. I'm not really sure what has changed in the 6.8 version. They haven't announced anything on their website, so that would be cool if when they did these updates, they did like Photoshop does and basically has a kind of like a splash screen where it tells you what the new updates are. So that would be really helpful. That's something that I would definitely suggest that they do. So moving along, let's go ahead with the brush designer. So to bring up the brush designer, you're going to go into Tools, Brush Designer. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the brush designer and the head settings. Okay, so basically what the brush designer is it gives you the ability to design your own custom brushes. Now, I discussed before in a previous video on how to make your own custom brush and save it out. So if you are unfamiliar with actually creating like custom brush sets, this is going to be a very helpful video for you to learn how to make watercolor brushes, how to make acrylic brushes, and how to make just a slew of different types of brushes, and to really learn how to use the brush designer the proper way. So let's go ahead and get into it. So as you can see here, I already have my head. You can create your own custom head brushes. They need to be in black and white. If you want to do transparency, you want to save that as a grayscale. Now, I created my own custom brush heads and grains in Photoshop. You can do that in any editor that you choose to do so. I just find it a lot easier to do it in Photoshop. I am going to make a note of making a video on how I did those in Photoshop. And basically it was quite the process. I first painted the brush heads on physical watercolor paper with physical watercolors, or I paint them with like physical acrylics and then I scan them in. So I do believe that authenticity makes for a much better brush versus just, you know, making them like crappily in like an editor. You'll get more realistic results if you use traditional medium and combine them with digital medium. So that's how I made these brush heads, and I'll go ahead and link in the description once I get that video uploaded about how to make your own brush heads in Photoshop. The reason why I discuss the head settings tabs is because it is the most important part of the brush. So basically this is what you're going to need You can click on here to load a brush head, load your own, or you can select from a collection. There's many different things that you can choose from here to make your brush. Many different things, but like I said, I feel that making your own is a little bit more authentic than creating them here. This is what I'm talking about. I've already made some grains out of watercolor, as you can see here, and you can select from the collection, or you can basically use your own. They don't really have a lot as far as selections go, so I definitely suggest making your own. But for today, we're going to focus on making one from here. So that way you guys don't have access to my my brush heads and whatnot. So I'm going to go ahead and just create something from here. Alright, so once you select something, then you can start like drawing on here. For some reason this isn't working, so I'm going to just do a default reset. If you ever find that you're having issues, you can just select here and then just click default if you've made too many changes and like screwed something up. So go back to select from collection, go to shapes. What was it that I picked? No, I picked nature. I picked this simple flower. So press OK and then select from collection, and I'm going to select a grain. I'm not liking any of this. I think I picked the round head. So that's basically what it's going to look like. Now we're going to make some changes here with these. So I'm going to just basically go over the heading. Okay, so Artrage comes with a few defaults, you know, custom images and shapes. And the head is the shape of the brush itself. So this is the shape of the brush itself. Now there's some settings on here that is not making the head show up completely. So we're going to fix all that, and we're going to make this into a really cool brush. So, but before we do that, I want to talk about the few different aspects of the brush. Okay, so you have, you know, either your brush images, okay, this would be your head and your grain, your custom brush images. You have your dab spacing, dab opacity, dab jitter, random start angle, follow stroke, rotation jitter, grain size, grain progression, scale with head, and rotate with head, and the basically all of those settings there, and also the grain that we're going to discuss. This is going to be part one of this video because it's going to get pretty long and intensive to explain all this. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to discuss the dab spacing. Okay, dab spacing controls basically the distance between the strokes. You can set it between 0 and 5 for a solid line, or 80 to 100% for a widely scattered dabs. So this is how you would get like a scattered brush, and let me show you what I mean. So I went ahead and I've cleared my brush designer. Okay, so if I paint here, you can see that the star is just like really not separated, so that's not what we want. So if you change the dab spacing to 43%, you can see that it's starting to separate, which basically it's like the spacing. Dab spacing is just like basically the space in between the space. And as you can see, it's getting, the more you space it out. Let's see what it does at 100%. So you have like a clear spacing there. So what happens if we take off the opacity? You can't see the brush at all. So if you turn the opacity all the way up to 100% and put this like down to like 94, we're starting to see some really good results here. Except there is something going on with this. There's some kind of like opacity like in like part like covering the brush, and I'm not sure why that is, but we're gonna go through all the settings and we're gonna figure it out. And brush designing is basically experimentation, but it will be a lot harder to experiment if you don't know how this thing works. So with that being said, I'm gonna just keep on going here and showing you the dabs base. Okay, so let's say that you don't want these to be in a straight line. Okay, you want some kind of random brush thingy going on. So you would, bump up the dab jitter, and this will basically give you more of a random type brush. This would be great for snowflakes. Like if you're creating snow or snowflakes or something like that, that would be something that you would use that for. And you bump that all the way up, and there you have like a snowflake brush. Of course, you wouldn't use this brush head because it's a flower. You'd probably use something else. I don't really like this brush head, so I'm going to change it. Let's see. Let me try a leaf. Okay, I kind of like that better. So if we take the dab jitter down, you can see. Now, here's a problem that we have. We don't like the rotation, so we're probably going to work on the next thing. We're going to work on the rotation, so we can get these leaves to go in the direction that we want them to. So let's go ahead and work on that. So we've worked on the head, the grain, the dab spacing. Now we're going to work on the stroke direction. So let's go ahead and get into that. So now we're going to be working on the head rotation, which is basically the direction of your brush, how you want it to go. So without changing any of the settings, you can see here that going in a straight line or going this way, it's pretty weird. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to check this box, random start angle, and if you go down, it changes the way that the leaf direction is. So if you turn that off, it goes up and down. If you turn it on, it kind of goes like a sideways or a random area. So what you want to do is you want to bump this up, follow the stroke, and if you want it to rotate, you can rotate it. So when you're like trying to do leaves in a circle or something, or if you want them randomized like that, so where they're not like in a straight line, that they change position, that is basically what the rotation jitter is. Let's see what happens if we bump it all the way up. So it's more of a circle. I'm drawing a really shitty circle, by the way, but it works really well. So that is basically how you change the direction of the leaves. Okay? Now, you can also turn this off, and you can have different variations of the leaves. You're just going to have to play with this. Just know that this area, the random start angle, is the direction of your stroke. Okay? So what we've learned so far, this changes your head. This changes the spacing in between your strokes, the opacity of the stroke, and the jitter of the stroke, which is basically how random it is, like for snowfall or something like that. And this changes the directions of your strokes. So good stuff there. So next we're going to be going with the grain of the stroke. We're going to be changing some settings on that. Now I always say that you have to select it to affect it. Notice how the grain area is grayed out because we don't have anything selected. So you're going to have to actually select a grain, in order to have it show up. So I'm going to choose something like round and oily. I'm choosing it from the presets, not from my own catalog. So here you can see that we have the settings show up now. They're not grayed out, so we can go ahead and play with these. In this example, I'm also going to change the head. So I'm going to select from my collection, and I'm going to change the head of my brush. And let's see what I'm going to use. I'm going to use this. Okay. So what the grain brush is good for is it affects where the grain appears exactly, if it's going to be in the same place or where the head moves every time. So think of it an example of creating hair. So hair brushes, the grain would move with the hair, whereas if you were making some type of like snow or some type of different type of brush that was grainy, it would be, you know, it would stand still. It wouldn't be moving with the brush. And so to speaking, traditionally, this is basically what gives your brush texture. Okay, so really difficult explaining that, but yeah, so let's get into it. So I'm going to go ahead and show you all the different things with the grain. Before we begin, I want you to go to the presets and just click on default settings. So that's going to reset all of the settings that we just changed, and choose this brush head and choose this grain that we just chose. So if you were to take down the grain size, you could see that it's going to give you little tiny dots from the brushes. And if you up the grain size, it's going to create larger brush heads from the grain. And this, if you up the grain progression, it basically is going to allows you to move with the brush. So right now we're going to try to create a hairbrush from these settings. So in order to do this, I had to change my dab spacing and all of the to 0, so that way the dots stick together. You can change the opacity to make the brush darker and lighter. So if I take the opacity down to 24%, it's making the brush lighter, so it's kind of streaky. If I select this random start angle, it changes the stroke settings here. As you can see, that's getting a little weird, so I don't think that I would really like that. The follow the stroke all the way up to 100% is, it's okay per se. If I untick that and I put it all the way down, I think that it calls for a more flowy hair type brush, but I'm not really digging the grain. So let's see what happens if we bump up the grain 100%. It's feeling less and less like a hairbrush. So if we turn the grain down, it's looking a little bit more like a hairbrush, so to speak. Let's see if we bump up the grain progression. So the grain progression is going to make the grain larger in size, so you can see that you see a little bit more detail of the grain. So let's put everything at 50% here. And that's the grain size. Looks like it's too large, and when you're painting it, it's making gaps there. So if you turn that down, you can see that you're just seeing the grain progression there. Now you can scale the grain to head, and it has some interesting effects like this, and you can rotate the grain as well. Now you can change all of these settings, but the grain is probably the most difficult thing to work with, in my opinion. It has some really unforgiving results. I just find that the grain is a lot harder to work with because it's the concept of understanding how something is moving or flowing with your brush is difficult. So you're definitely going to have to experience with these different things. So, you know, with your grain, you can choose a different grain if it's not working for you, if it's not giving you the effect that you're wanting. Rotate with head in the brush grain settings. Rotate with head allows the brush grains to rotate along with the brush head. Leaving it at 100% means that it will never change direction, and ignoring any rotation settings for the head. So it will 100% will match the head rotation exactly. So this is rotate with head. I have it at 100%, and I'm painting here so you can see how the rotation of head looks and without it. So I've changed the head to a square so you guys can better see this, and that's basically what it is. If you up the dab spacing, you probably can see it better. But yeah, so basically rotating it. Basically think of this like when you're painting and you're rotating your brush, the paint is moving smoothly with the brush. So that's pretty important stuff. The next thing that I want to basically go over is the scale with the head. So I want to reiterate with this. So I'm going to go up to 100% with that, and then I'm going to clear it, and then I'm going to turn it off. So let me explain the difference of this. So if you have the scale with head at 100%, it will scale the grain proportionately to the head. So basically your grain will be 100% proportionate to the brush. That's a good thing if you're wanting the grain to be looking even throughout, you know, the brush experience. If you want it to be if you want the grain to automatically increase and decrease in size along with the brush head, you're going to want to put it at 0%. So that's something to consider. So 100% on the size of the brush if you set it to 0. So I hope that makes sense. So this is part 1 of the brush designer. I hope this explains things. We're going to get into more in depth of the brush designer in part 2. So stay tuned for that. And I'm also going to make a video on how to make your own brush heads in Photoshop. And I hope you will come back to view those. Thank you so much for watching. And as always, if you like this video, give it a big thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe and ring that bell.